Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. This week I'm going to be looking at, well, actually they're all legends, but that isn't meant to be the communicating factor here. It's actually that all the cards I'm going to be looking at have some sort of benefit to a forward leaving the field or being broken or something basically coming off the field for whatever reason. Anyway, the cards I'm going to be looking at this week are Garland from Opus 14, and there's a fair few Opus 14 cards. Bismarck from Opus 14, Spiritus from Opus 13, Ravana from Opus 14, and Sid FFBE from Opus 10. First, we're going to get started with Garland. Now, Garland is a fantastic card, so strong. It's a 4 CP 8k fire forward. If Garland is dealt damage by a summon or ability, the damage becomes 0 instead. When a backup is put from the field into the break zone, I draw one card, and then a Flare S ability, which is an S and Dole, I choose one forward, break it. Then your opponent selects one backup they control, put it into the break zone. So if a backup breaks at all for any reason whatsoever, even if it's just your opponent using a backup ability which requires that backup to break, you still get a card from it. So very strong card. So, Susano, Lord of the Revel. He has a 6 CP haste. If a forward damaged by Susano, Lord of the Revel is put from the field into the breaks in the same turn, remove from the game instead, so that's pretty good. But when Susano, Lord of the Revel enters the field, select one backup you control and may put it into the break zone. When you do so, deal 9,000 damage to all the forwards other than Susano, Lord of the Revel. Now that obviously includes your forwards as well, so anything that's put from the field into the break zone from Susano on your side as well, also removed. But as Garland has the ability to not take damage from summons or abilities, including your own, it means that Garland will take nothing from this. Also, because of Susano's entry ability, you put a backup into the break zone, so you actually get to draw a card with Garland on the field as well. So by playing Susano, you have hopefully wiped your opponent's board. He is a haste forward as well, and you've also gained a card from breaking one of your own backups as well, so that's pretty good. Right, next we've got Firion, similar sort of thing, but just he can at any point put a backup into the break zone until the end of the turn. Firion gains First Strike or Brave. It's useful at any point, so even if just your opponent's attacking with something, you know, you just put Firion into the break zone, he gains First Strike, and you also get a card to hand. Just nice. Then you got Vermilion Bird Lassie Kaituna. I think I mentioned this before when I featured Vermilion Bird Lassie Kaituna. But her Verboten Eidolon S ability, which is an S, 2 fire, and a dull, put 5 backups into the break zone, break all the forwards opponent controls. What's good about this is that put 5 backups into the break zone is actually part of the cost. Now I say that's good, obviously putting all of your backups into the break zone isn't necessarily a good thing, but it does mean with Garland on the field, you're actually gaining 5 cards to hand as well. So where Verboten Eidolon was going to kind of be an all-in kind of push for game before, now it's still a push for game, but you get a lot of cards to hand at the same time, which can help you kind of solidify that push for game. Kane and Fusoya. So Kane, obviously he can put a lightning backup into the break zone. When you do so, he comes in a little bit cheaper, and he's also got a fantastic entry ability. It does have to be an active lightning backup though, and it does have to be a lightning backup. So if you're playing Garland, obviously you're going to be fire lightning, so you may need to be careful of the lightning backups you do have. But yeah, ultimately Kane can reduce his cost by putting active backup into the break zone. That'll get you a card from Garland, but then if you put something like Fusoya into the break zone, when he goes into the break zone, you can choose one forward in the break zone, add that to your hand. So actually by using, or just by Fusoya going to the break zone, you get 2 cards back to your hand, which is really, or 1 card drawn and 1 card recurred from your break zone, which is excellent. You can also combine that with something like RG as well, so when he's put from the field to the break zone, you can choose one of the 3, choose one forward, it gains haste until the end of the turn, so you could give Kane haste, choose one forward, activate it, or choose one backup of cost 1 in your break zone, play it onto the field. There are some decent backups of cost 1 now as well, so you could potentially use RG's ability to bring in Larkaikus, who's a 1 CP fire backup, which would remove a forward your opponent controls as well, but then you'd also get a card off Garland, or you can just choose a forward, activate it, so maybe Garland was dull for whatever reason, you could activate him to maybe use his S ability as well. A lot of good combinations. Then other cards in Lightning that allow you to break your backups, obviously Opus 1 Lulu. She won't really get much play regardless, but, you know, being able to put a backup into the break zone, deal that forward 5k damage, but also get a card to hand makes her a bit more palatable and a bit more usable. Cannoneer, similar sort of thing, not a hugely playable card, but still a decent enough effect. Lightning and a colourless dull, put Cannoneer and 1 backup other than Cannoneer into the break zone, choose one forward, deal at 7k damage. So you get to deal 7k to something, but you also gain 2 cards to hand through Garland as well. Now obviously the forward that Cannonade is putting into the break zone other than itself can be used for the CP2 dull, so effectively you're breaking 2 backups and dulling 1 to deal 7k to something. Now, it doesn't have to be an active forward, which normally Lightning does have that stipulation, so that's nice for that at least, but it is still, you know, a heavy investment just for dealing 7k to something, but getting 2 cards to hand makes it a little bit better. Next up, Shiva, Lady of the Frost, and Goomba. So, Shiva has the effect of put 3 backups into the break zone, remove Shiva Lady of the Frost from the game, then play Shiva Lady of the Frost onto the field. So you get 3 cards back to hand with Garland on the field for that, and if you've got Goomba as one of your backups, it also means that Goomba will search himself and play himself onto the field dull, provided you have more Goomba in your deck. So that's a pretty nice way to be able to, you know, kind of recur some of the cost of Shiva's effect, but also just getting 3 cards to hand through that is really good. And Shiva's just got a fantastic entry ability as well. Duller character, which is fine, but then you get to freeze all the forwards your opponent controls as well. Kuja, similar sort of thing again, so you can put 2 ice backups into the break zone, return Kuja to your hand. You can only use the ability if in your main phase and if Kuja is in your break zone, so no using this on your opponent's turn unfortunately, but still being able to break 2 backups again with Goomba makes it even better. To get 2 cards to hand as well as Kuja, it's actually 3 cards to hand, which makes playing Kuja then even easier. So maybe you only have 3 backups, you break 2 of them to get Kuja to hand, 2 cards to hand with Garland as well, put those into the break zone to then play Kuja to deal and free something out of the way. Obviously that's a bit of an all-in, but still it's a nice way to just be able to get Kuja to hand and then be able to play him. Larsa. Now you could have gone for Thordan the 17th, I think he's called, being an EX, and he does get you any card to hand, but I like Larsa because when Larsa enters the field, you draw 2 cards as opposed to the 1, but also when Larsa's put from the field into the break zone, draw a card. So if you have your means of breaking your own backups through something like Firion or Susano, it means that you can get a card off Larsa and then off of Garland as well. But Thordan is just as good of an option, to be honest, because he can search you any card, which is good, and when he's put into the field in the break zone, you also get a card off of that as well. And finally, Ravana. So obviously all these backups being put into the break zone would reactivate Ravana, which means he can attack again. So if you do have something like Firion on your field, you can attack Ravana, then use Firion to break a backup, and that will reactivate Ravana. Ravana can attack again, then you can use Firion to break another backup. Obviously it's a bit aggressive against yourself as well as against your opponent, but if you're pushing for the game, that's great, and ultimately if it keeps you, well, you can use this at any point as well, so you would actually be able to, you know, if Ravana is dull, your opponent attacks with a forward, you can use Firion to break a backup, which will then reactivate Ravana, and all this whilst getting cards off of Garland. Alright, Ravana, Saviour of the Gnath. So he's just an excellent card. I love this card. I mean, most of the primals in Opus 14 are really, really good cards, but Ravana I think is probably my favourite, just because any card that can attack multiple times is pretty decent in my opinion. But I like the way, I like his stipulation. It doesn't make him too overpowered, and ultimately you have to invest quite a bit for it to have happen. But yeah, when Ravana, Saviour of the Gnath can attack 4 times in the same turn, Ravana cannot gain Brave, so well, we'll go over that in a minute. If Ravana is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 5,000 instead, and when a character is put from the field into the break zone, activate Ravana, Saviour of the Gnath. So something you can do with Ravana, I haven't put it in the video because I forgot until now. Basically, when Ravana enters the field, if you've got the Luge backup down, you can actually use Luge to give Ravana Brave. Obviously, Ravana cannot gain Brave, so then what you'd have to do on the stack is cast Kuchelane to make it so Ravana loses all his abilities. Kuchelane will resolve, Ravana loses his abilities, then Luge would be able to give Ravana Brave, and that doesn't end at the end of the turn, so then going forward, Ravana would have Brave every turn and can attack 4 times a turn. That's kind of gross. Anyway, so Realm. There's a lot of monsters in this video actually, and with Ravana it's no exception. So when Realm enters the field, you may search for up to 1 monster of cost 1 and of cost 2 and play them onto the field. So some excellent monsters come in and you can just immediately break them, which obviously would reactivate Ravana. So Dandrine. Put Dandrine into the break zone, choose one forward, dull it. If you've got counters, you can also choose 2 forwards, dull them and freeze them, but you need more counters there. So just be able to play Realm onto the field, attack Ravana, and then use Dandrine to then reactivate it and also dull a forward out of the way, and then you can also use Flan to just put Flan into the break zone. Choose one forward. If they don't pay 3, it cannot attack or block this turn. So 2 excellent cards that will reactivate Ravana by breaking themselves, but also making it harder for your opponent to block as well. Then you got Flan and Unsanganashi. Now Flan I like because it can actually search other Flans, which you can play onto the field and then immediately use their ability. But again, Flan can actually search the other Flan that we just looked at as well, the Earth Flan. So there's a good way there to be able to just keep on consistently getting Flans, playing them onto the field, make it hard for your opponent to block, whilst also giving Ravana the ability to reactivate and attack again. And then, you know, Flan be able to break and make your opponent discard a card. It's not bad either. And then you've got Unsanganashi, just put him into the break zone. That then makes Ravana active again, and he then can't be targeted by summons or abilities as well, which is very strong. Then you got Adamantoise and Whale Zombie. So put Adamantoise into the break zone and choose one forward during this turn. The next damage dealt to it is reduced by 3,000 instead, and you get to draw a card. Now, being able to draw cards is nice anyway, but then also Adamantoise making it so the next damage dealt to Ravana is minus 3k. That means the next damage would actually be minus 8k on Ravana, which is hilarious. And then Whale Zombie has an entry ability as well, so you get to draw a card, which is fine. But then you put it into the break zone, you get to sort some of the cards at the top of your deck as well. And again, reactivate Ravana, attack again. Then finally you got Yeoman and Bomb. So Yeoman can actually be used to give Ravana First Strike, which normally isn't fantastic, and then also gets to draw your card as well. No, I say that, I'll rephrase that. First Strike is fantastic, but Yeoman never was seen as a fantastic way of giving First Strike, but playing Realm onto the field to then bring in Yeoman to then give Ravana First Strike and reactivate him so he can attack again is really good. And then obviously you've got Bomb as well, so you can put Bomb into the break zone, deal 3k damage to a forward and 2k to all the forwards your opponent controls, which actually means combined with the Yeoman, Ravana's going to be attacking effectively for 11k to all the forwards your opponent controls. Alright, next we've got Star Sibyl. So, Star Sibyl obviously can be used to play Realm. So that means you could attack with Ravana and then use Star Sibyl, and Star Sibyl stipulates you can only use the ability during your turn, but it doesn't matter when during your turn, so in your attack phase is fine. You attack with Ravana. Use Star Sibyl to bring in Realm, that reactivates Ravana, and then she brings in monsters as well. You can then attack with Ravana again, and then on the stack, use a monster. That reactivates Ravana, attack again, monster into the break zone, you reactivate, attack again. All from just cracking Star Sibyl. Pretty decent. Gilgamesh. So I actually built a deck which will probably be my next deck spotlight, to be fair. But it's all about forwards that can multi-attack, and Gilgamesh is no stranger to multi-attacking. I mean, I think this and one of the Opus 1 Gilgamesh is the only ones that can multi-attack actually, but still it's very powerful and quite fun. But ultimately, when Gilgamesh is put from the field into the break zone, you may pay X. If you do so, search for a card named Gilgamesh of cost X and play it onto the field dull. So even though Gilgamesh may be kicking the bucket, you can pay X to search another one, bring onto the field, and then ultimately Ravana will reactivate from this Gilgamesh dying. And then, similar sort of thing, you can use Ultros's ability to dial and put him into the break zone, choose one forward, it loses 5,000 power to the end of the turn, which is really good with Ravana's ability, because obviously he takes minus damage anyway. But you can also pay one water with Ultros to then search for another card, Ultros, and add it to your hand as well. But all the Ultroses work really well, especially the first one, the Legend, because when he's put from the field into the break zone, you can just pay 2 water to get another Ultros and play onto the field. It's left the field, Ravana will reactivate, but you also get to get another forward onto the field. And Magic Pot. Here's where we have some fun, and by fun I mean it's a bit awkward and costly, but it's fun nonetheless. So obviously you can use Magic Pot to remove or put a forward into the break zone and then play a forward of the same name onto the field. But let's say in your attack phase you have managed to attack with Ravana 4 times. You can then use Magic Pot to break Ravana, to bring another Ravana onto the field. Now, Magic Pot doesn't state that the forward has to come in dull, so Ravana will come into the field active. If you can then give him haste, he can then attack again. And then if you can break characters, or, you know, both your opponent's and your own 3 more times, Ravana can attack 3 more times. So actually, you've attacked 8 times in 1 turn with Ravana. That's just hilarious! Spiritus. So just a bit of short and sweet one here, because he is a very powerful card, and it's fairly obvious the cards you pair him with, Neo-X, Death, Veritas, that sort of stuff. But there are some other cool combos that I like to use with him. So when a Dark Forward other than Spiritus you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose up to 1 forward, remove it from the game. This effect can trigger once per turn. So it's not too overpowered, but a lot of the Dark Forwards are overpowered that you would pair it with. So it kind of leans in heavy to that horribleness. Anyway, Necron. When Necron enters the field, choose one character other than Necron you control. Its element becomes dark. This effect does not end at the end of the turn. So obviously Necron making something dark means that if it's a forward and it gets put from the field into the break zone, Spiritus will then remove something. So combine this with the likes of maybe Isael, Assail has Dull, put Assail into the break zone, play on ice forward of cost 5 or less from your hand onto the field. You can use that at any point, so you can use that on your opponent's turn as well. So that would mean that Assail is playing something big onto the field. Technically you could play Necron, but you want to, use Necron to make Assail dark. But yeah, you can use Assail to put herself into the break zone, play a big forward onto the field, and Spiritus will see that and be like, a dark forward has left the field. Well, been put in the field into the break zone. I'm going to remove something. So aside from whatever Assail is bringing in, and probably having a heavy effect when that enters as well, you eventually get to remove something with Spiritus as well. Then you got Famfrit. Good old simple Famfrit. Just because you can put Famfrit into the break zone, dark card or dark forward on your field, put it into the break zone, you then get to remove something as well. Now obviously you need to be careful, because if you've got a couple of forwards there and you cast Famfrit, your opponent will be like, well, if I'm going to have to remove something anyway, I'm going to go all in and kill something. So they might kill the Spiritus, at which point Famfrit would then break their forward and your forward, and then you wouldn't get the remove from Spiritus. So be careful with these sorts of effects. And then Ultimecia, I love this card. This card is just fantastic. But when Ultimecia enters the field, select one forward you control, put it into the break zone. When you do so, choose one forward of the same cost as the forward you put into the break zone, you gain control of it. Now what's interesting, and well, not that interesting really, but when Ultimecia puts that forward into the break zone, the second part of her effect actually enters the stack, at the same point that Spiritus' effect enters the stack as well. But yeah, Ultimecia can put a, dark forward, you control into the break zone. That would then mean you get to remove something in Spiritus, and you also get to take control of a forward your opponent controls, which means that you've got to remove 2 forwards from their play using Ultimecia. Pretty good. Sid FFBE. When a forward of your opponent enters the field, deal it 2000 damage. If the forward entered play without paying for its CP cost, it deal it 9000 damage instead. And then he's also got Spine, Shatter, Dive 0, S, 3 Wind and a Dull. Choose one forward, deal it 10,000 damage and 1 point of damage to that forward's controller. Be wary, because you can hit your own forwards and you will deal yourself 1 point of damage. So that's kind of amusing as well. But yeah, otherwise a fairly strong card and can be used in conjunction with quite a few interesting cards. So Dorgan. When a backup enters the field, choose one forward your opponent controls. Remove it from the game for as long as Dorgan is on the field. Now obviously if Dorgan leaves the field, that means those forwards will re-enter. But as they are re-entering without having paid their cost, Sid FFBE will deal them all 9k. Again, you need to be careful that their entry abilities aren't worth it for your opponent. So if they are entering and actually they don't care, they're going to die, because ultimately they don't have control of them anyway. But if they're bringing in something like, 7 CP Sephiroth, which is making you discard a card, you want to be careful of that and actually protect your Dorgan a bit more. Now obviously there's way. Then we've got Basilisk. So any forward enters the field on your opponent's side, it takes 2k regardless. If they don't pay for the cost, obviously it takes 9k, but taking that 2 cost is actually, or 2k even, is fine, because if you've got Basilisk, you can just put it into the break zone, choose one damage forward, break it. Layak. When a forward your opponent controls attacks, put Layak into the break zone. If you do so, activate all the characters you control and draw 1 card, which is fine, because let's say you attacked with Sid FFBE, your opponent then attacks, reactivates Sid FFBE, you then have all the backups you would need to be able to dull and use Sid FFBE's Spine Shatter Dive 0 to, he could block actually before you use the ability, and then use the ability to deal 10k to another forward, and ultimately deal a point of damage to your opponent. Buckaboo. When a character your opponent enters the field, put Buckaboo into the break zone. If you do so, your opponent discards 2 cards from their hand. I did say there was a lot of monsters today, but yeah, ultimately your opponent will have to play something onto the field, and it will take 2k, but also your opponent's going to have to discard 2 cards as well, which sucks. But if that forward is entering from not paying for its CP, then that means they're still having to discard 2 cards even though they've lowered the cost, and that forward will also be taking 9k damage. And Varana. So if you can use Sid's ability or Spine Shatter Drive to be able to deal a point of damage to your opponent with Varana on the field, Varana then becomes a forward. And Chlenka. So let's make Sid FFBE brave, attack twice, and then you can use his S ability to then deal 10k to a forward opponent controls, and then deal a point of damage to your opponent as well. So Sid FFBE can actually be used to deal 3 points of damage to your opponent with Chlenka. And finally we have Bismarck, Lord of the Mists, and he is a very good card. So he's a 5 CP 9k wind forward. When a character is returned from the field to its owner's hand, draw 1 card. This effect will trigger only once per turn. At the end of each of your turns, choose 1 wind character you control, return to its owner's hand. Dull 1 wind active forward. 1 active wind forward, choose 1 forward, deal it 2k damage. So he's got a lot of decent effects. but I quite like using him with this sniper. So when active sniper becomes dull, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it 4k damage. So if you use sniper's ability alongside Bismarck's ability, actually means you're dealing 6k to one forward just by dulling sniper. That's fine. Then you got this little 1 CP Thief from Opus 4. When Thief leaves the field, your opponent puts the top card of their deck into the break zone. So you could just play Thief onto the field, go to pass your turn, Bismarck can then bounce the Thief back to your hand, you draw a card off that effect, and then your opponent mills a card. It's kind of funny because you're accelerating your own deck as much as you're accelerating your opponent's deck. Well, it's not accelerating so much, each of you are drawing the same amount, but well, you're not even drawing, you're drawing and they're milling, but you're going through the deck at the same rate, effectively. But, you know, every turn you can just play this little Thief. At the end of the turn, it comes back to your hand, you get to mill your opponent a card. Fat Chocobo. So, when Fat Chocobo enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, add all card named Chocobo among them to your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, Chocobos in general will work quite well with Bismarck because you get to bounce things back to hand, and lots of Chocobo cards have excellent entry abilities. And you know, you could bounce this Fat Chocobo to play the other Fat Chocobo back up if you wanted, but ultimately, if you just keep on getting this back to hand, which will draw you a card, and then playing it to then get even more cards to hand, I mean, you need to be careful because you're going to go through your deck pretty quickly, but ultimately, you get to keep on accelerating and really hoarding your opponent. Varn. So when Varn enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, play 1 forward of cost 3 or less among them onto the field, then shuffle the cards revealed and return to the bottom of your deck. If you have 5 points of damage or more, perform this action twice. So, you know, you probably want a deck geared up to play Varn like this, but ultimately, if you can keep on bouncing Varn back to your hand at the end of every turn and replaying him to then keep on playing 2 forwards, that's hilarious. Similar to Chocobos, you just keep on swarming the field. Chelinka. So using Chelinka obviously to make Bismarck attack twice, that's fine. Giving forwards Brave as well is fine because you can then dull them for Bismarck's effects. But ultimately, using Bismarck's end of turn effect to bounce Chelinka back to your hand means that you don't have to pay for her own ability, meaning that every turn you can play Chelinka onto the field to make a forward be able to attack twice. Mid, again, being able to bounce mid back to your hand every turn means that mid will be in your hand ready to back attack if you need it to. So your opponent's obviously going to know it's there because you had it on the field once, Bismarck bounced it back to your hand, but you know, opponents forget things, and ultimately having that effect there to play it onto the field and having it forward gain plus 1000 and cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities is really good nonetheless. Typhon. Yeah. When Typhon enters the field, choose 1 forward, put it under the top 4 cards of his owner's deck. But every turn, you could use Bismarck to keep on putting Typhon back into your hand, which means that you can, every turn, to keep on playing Typhon, and all their forwards just keep on going back into the opponent's deck. Obviously, eventually they're going to keep on drawing them, but when they get played, just play Typhon, goes back into the deck. Zidane, this is a horrible little card. Being able to play Zidane every turn would be disgusting because every turn you get to look at your opponent's hand and be like, I don't like that card, goodbye. But ultimately it can be done with Bismarck, and Bismarck's going to be drawing you a card as well every turn, so you're going to be going through your opponent's deck and making them discard cards whilst you're drawing from your deck. Layak. When a forward opponent controls attacks, put Layak into the break zone. If you do so, activate all the characters you control, draw a card. Obviously, that would reactivate Bismarck and any other forwards. You can then dull those forwards to deal damage to a opponent controls if it's attacking. You get to block and deal the damage, which means that even a small little 4K forward even can block, dull Bismarck to then deal a further 4K to that forward. It means it's blocking for 8. Kunshira. If you control 4 more backups, Kunshira loses 3000 power. So you could potentially play a forward, you could have Kunshira on the field and play a backup to then have some sort of effect. Now Kunshira's power will go down, but at the end of your turn, you can use Bismarck to actually put a forward, use a backup back into your hand, which means that Kunshira will actually keep her 9k power. And there we go, folks. A lot of meta cards this week, actually, but I think the difference with this set, Opus 14, is that there's a lot of meta cards that are actually a lot of fun to play. Generally, I find that a lot of the meta cards tend to be kind of, not toxic so much, but they're just not fun to play against. But I've played a few decks recently, with a lot of meta cards, and there's still a lot of fun even to play against because there's so many things I have to take into account when they're happening, but ultimately I think they're good fun. And also a lot of monsters this set as well, which, you know, it's nice to see, not this set, this video, and having the chance to play a lot of monsters is good, and the fact that they synergize well with a lot of modern cards is also excellent. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video, stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next one.